You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this new edition of the Secret Teachings, Friday, August 1st, 2025. Although it is August 2nd, where I am here in Japan. I want to let you know that from the start of tonight's show, this episode was pre-recorded, so you will not be able to directly communicate with me in the YouTube X and Facebook chat. I may be able to be in the chat, but it will not be because I'm sitting here in studio. It would be because I am remote, if I'm able to do that where I am Saturday morning. In fact, this last few days have been really busy for me, and that's why you got a couple of 1-hour shows this week. And tonight I'm going to try and push it to the full 2 hours because it's a really, really important show. And because the information I think is more critical and more vital than the other shows that I've done this week. But you get a 2-hour show tonight, pre-recorded. I think I recorded this sometime Wednesday night, my time. So that would have been Tuesday morning, really early your time in the United States, at least. And I'm having to do that because after I finished with the main editing of my new book, which I'm still trying to figure out a title for it, maybe tonight's show title could be a possible title for the new book, but I have to do a few little things on it, but it's pretty much done. At least all of the, I need to include this right now, details are out of my head. And so I've been able to relax there a little bit, but I've also got a personal life, and my wife and I decided to go to a Japanese onsen, which I love very much because no dermatology, no lotion, no chemicals, nothing I've ever used or tried to avoid using has ever helped my skin. But a Japanese onsen, a real one, helps my skin. It makes you feel really good. So I decided to take a little kind of mini vacation while she has some time off. And that's why you're getting a pre-recorded show tonight. For those of you in the archive, just audio, well, of course, you know that you'll have a Friday night video version of this show, which is free on YouTube. If you're on YouTube already, or X or Facebook, any social media sites you're watching this right now, know that there is an audio only archive, and there is one for subscribers, so you don't have to listen to any advertisements, and there's one for non-subscribers, which means you have ads, but hey, it's free, and it also financially supports us. A lot of listeners go and they click on the shows and let them play in the background. All those ads that play, they don't even listen to them. It all finances this show, along with not just the subscriptions, but when those of you who listen to this show and enjoyed enough want to go and get one of my books, that helps us as well. So that's our quote unquote housekeeping to begin the show. The title of the show tonight is Pogroms Progress, which I think is a clever title. If you remember Pilgrim's Progress and the theology and religious aspects of that book, I think we read that in 5th or 6th grade in my Christian school, Baptist Christian school. And I thought Pogroms Progress would be a good place to start tonight to sort of clarify a very complex issue. And it begins with the definition of a pogrom. A pogrom is a violent riot aimed at expelling or massacring certain groups of people or one specific group of people. I think it's unfortunate that, much like the quote Jewish Holocaust during World War II, we tend to ignore all of the other Holocausts and genocides and pogroms. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not popular. I don't think it's even trendy to say this. I feel that I'm on the outside of both the trends of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable as they've continued to shift and change. But I maintain that, and I'll say this very directly, Jews do not own the word Holocaust. Jews do not own the word pogrom. And Jews do not even own the idea of a final solution. These are words, these are terms that have acquired mystical dimensions. They are words, they are terms that have, frankly, very little meaning outside of super politically or ethnically charged arguments and debates that really aren't even arguments and debates. It's people berating and emotionally blackmailing and kind of, with social credit, bribing you to accept a certain definition or a certain perception of the world and of reality. In fact, I had a gentleman say something, well, he wasn't much of a gentleman, but I'm trying to be, had a gentleman on social media tell me that, okay, sure, Jews don't own the word Holocaust, but we do own the final solution. And I said to him, no, you don't own the final solution, because there's a definition in popular culture of what a final solution is. And then there's just what the two words mean. Like, I found the final solution to writing books is to, at some point, I have to just stop and tell myself, don't add anymore. Because this new book was supposed to be a 60-page essay, and it turned into an almost 600-page magnum opus. So my point is, a final solution is both a definition in pop culture and history. It's also just two words that could refer to anything. And it also is a term that has these mystical dimensions to it. So what a final solution supposedly is, based on the pop culture and the history, is this decision that all of the Jews under Reich control should be rounded up and killed. That's the final solution. And when you actually read about the final solution on the Yad Vashem website or in encyclopedias, there are many liberties taken with the historical assumptions that we have, and many liberties taken with the fact that the general public are not historians and, generally speaking, are not interested that much in history, and considering the fact that even if they would, most history is not only written by the victor, but most history is pretty bland, and you don't really get much context with what you do hear, or what you do see, or what you do read. So that leaves us with a predicament. You either don't care, or you care enough to adhere to a certain ideology. And when it comes to the final solution, the ideologies are: you either believe entirely in the mysticism of it, or you reject it entirely and are then categorized as some white supremacist Nazi. Although I would argue that the majority of people that would argue against the final solution as being an extermination plan are probably not people that are white. In fact, most of the arguments I've heard against the final solution being literal by the pop culture and the historical definition, it usually comes from Arabs, which are not, again, white. It also comes from one of the largest religions in the world, which is Islam. A religion and a people, Arabs, not all Muslims are Arabs, of course, but comes from a religion that also will tell you the same thing the Jews tell you, that Jesus was not the true physical Son of God. Although Jesus never claimed to be, that's the accusation of the Pharisees. And Jesus actually says something in the Bible to the effect of, well, that's the claim that you level against me. That's the charge, but I'm not that. However, Jesus was here to overturn the authority of the Pharisees. And I'd say that radical, modern, contemporary Zionists, who probably aren't even Jewish, not that that matters one way or the other, but they're kind of the descendants of those Pharisees that Jesus didn't like too much, which is also probably part of the reason why the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance defines anti-Semitism as being reading the Bible, because apparently it's very clear in the Bible if you read it, and not apparently because they say it, but because I've read the Bible, and it is very apparent and apparently clear that the Jews and the Pharisees did conspire to turn Jesus over to the authorities and to encourage that and to prosecute and to persecute him and his followers, and then to proceed in killing him. However, the Jesus story is also a mythology that is universal around the world. The Hero with a Thousand Faces of Joseph Campbell and the Jesus story is a mixture of not just that sort of hero mythology, but also what we call pagan theology, which is not negative or evil. It is just, Christian theology is pagan theology. The four horses of the apocalypse of the four seasons. The story of Revelation is in the apocalypse in Greek, means the unveiling, which is the unveiling of nature in the fall, bringing us to winter. The pale horse of the winter is green, chloros, as in chlorophyll, as in when the leaves lose their color, death is coming. So we could talk about that. That's a whole different show, and I might be slightly digressing. Okay, but the point is, the people that believe that Jesus wasn't the Son of God are both Muslims and Christians. And the Muslims have a very interesting perspective on the final solution, too, on average. Much of the Arab world does. In fact, I think a lot of Asia does, too. I guess it depends on who you talk to. But they believe that it's not what we've been defining it as. And that comes from just basic research. I mean, if you go to the, for example, the Yad Vashem website, which is like the main Israeli Jewish Holocaust remembrance information source outside of the various museums that pop up like Starbucks and McDonald's, the Yad Vashem website says this. And in fact, I will actually show you on the screen a screen share of my new book, because it's not completely edited yet, but I'll show you some of the pages in here so you can see the screenshots that I've taken and included from websites like Yad Vashem. It says this: the Wannsee Conference. This is the famous conference where the, quote, final solution was decided. It says, the Wannsee Conference, held on January 20th, 1942, was called to coordinate the final solution of the Jewish problem. As a result, a network of extermination camps was established in which 1.7 million Jews were murdered in 1942-1943. The Holocaust Encyclopedia defines the final solution as, quote, a shortened version of the Nazi term, the final solution of the Jewish question. I wonder if I can pronounce the German. I did take German for 4 years. Die Inlösung der Judenfrage. 4 years of German down the drain. Japanese, I honestly think's a little bit easier than German, but that's just me. Refers to the systematic mass destruction of Europe's Jews. Now, notice that these words are really deliberately chosen. So, for example, the Yad Vashem website minces no words when they say 1.7 million Jews were murdered in 1942, 1943. However, the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust, which is the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, says systematic mass destruction of Europe's Jews. Now, those two words, murdered and destruction, could be very similar. If you destroy something, you've murdered somebody, you've destroyed them, or you've murdered something, but they are very distinct. And especially for a short definition, when you're looking at, say, a dictionary, a single word can change the definition. So that alone is an interesting thing to observe and to think about, that the Holocaust Encyclopedia says systematic mass destruction of Europe's Jews. Okay, so that's the idea of what the final solution is. Here is a chart. Those of you listening via audio obviously can't see this, but it is a chart you can see in my new book when it comes out, or you can try to find it based on what I'm saying. This is a chart from Statistia.com, which is a giant statistical website, and it explicitly lists the types of death and the locations of death for specifically deaths, but usually it's assumed these are all Jewish deaths, at various places like Treblinka, like Auschwitz, which was a large complex. There were multiple facilities, Belzec, Sobibor, Kelmo, and others. And you'll notice at the top, it says there were 1.3 million deaths via shooting operations and gas wagons in the German-occupied Soviet Union. Now, obviously, this is not just representing Jews. This includes others, but it really doesn't matter, because if it represented all Jews, it would be a problem to the overall final solution story. And if it represented everybody, it would also be a problem to the overall final solution story. It's a problem either way. And let me explain why that is. You'll notice when you read and you research on all the official websites about this, that shooting operations are one of the primary ways in which they describe Jews being murdered, or anybody being murdered for that matter. Now, and you would assume that would actually be, unless you were out of ammunition, resources were scarce, which they certainly were toward the end of the war. But you would think that that would be a really easy way to kill people. That would be a really easy way to get rid of people, rather than, I don't know, putting them on transit lines and taking them to transit camps and then making them walk hundreds of miles to other camps, and then continuing to feed them and continuing to clothe them and provide them with medical assistance and so on and so forth, which are things that were done at places like Auschwitz, despite what you might assume. I can scroll down in my book here and I can show you evidence of that in the book, and evidence you can find online. If you screenshot these images, put them into a Google image search, you can pull up the original photographs. These are images here from Auschwitz 1. And this is part of a hospital for the prisoners there. Here's another image. These are official images. This is also from Auschwitz, which was partnered with IG Farben Werk. And this is prisoner receiving medical care, probably state of the art, or at least pretty expensive medical care at that. Here's the Holocaust Encyclopedia website, where they have, this is one of many photographs, one photograph of SS officers and German nurses at the camp. And then there's a photograph. This is not Auschwitz. I believe this is Dachau. This is I mean, Auschwitz did have this happened at Auschwitz too, but this particular photo, I think, is decay, which was the first so-called camp set up. And this is a bunch of Jewish women who have babies. In fact, there's a bunch of pictures of this. And as a matter of fact, a Polish midwife who I wouldn't even dare try to pronounce her name because I don't even know where to start with that. I think it's like Stanisława Leszlikinska. I can't pronounce it. I apologize. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that language is more difficult than Japanese. But anyway, there's a Polish midwife, very famous woman. You could type her name in, even though even with the name, it's kind of hard to type in because it has different characters. But you type her name in, and you could type in Leszczynska, and then midwife and babies. And you'll learn that a Polish midwife with that name delivered 3,000 babies at Auschwitz. 3,000. That's a lot of babies. And considering that there were thousands of people that were found at the facility during, quote, liberation, calls a lot of additional things into question. By the way, Auschwitz also had, and you can see it here in this photo, this picture, Auschwitz also had sporting events for prisoners. Auschwitz also had a theater. Auschwitz also had, I believe this was an all-woman, and I believe it was all Jewish, an orchestra, all-female orchestra. And you notice that people were dressed pretty nice. Maybe they only dressed that way when they went to the theater. But these are all official photographs from Auschwitz. Kind of changes perhaps your definition of what Auschwitz was and what it mostly was. What it largely was a work camp and a facility to make goods for the war. It's basically what it was. And you might have seen this on the screen. I scrolled through some of this already. There's a famous Chicago Tribune article from 1992, I believe it was originally published. And this particular article, which is now behind a paywall, if you want a copy of it, I can send you, maybe I can send you screenshots or something like that. But this is a Chicago Tribune article that says the numbers at Auschwitz, and this was updated in 2021, you can see on the screen, the numbers at Auschwitz have been altered. They've been fixed. Why? Why would they have to fix them? Well, because the original estimates of 4 million people dying were wrong. They were estimates. The actual number, according to the Chicago Tribune, was probably 1.1 to 1.5 million. At least 90% of the victims were Jewish. Okay. So when I read that, if I read that in Germany or Israel, I can go to jail for reading that. So much for liberal democracy, right? I can go to jail for reading that in Israel and I believe in Germany too. Why? The people that discovered this were Jewish and Polish scholars. And the idea of 4 million people dying at Auschwitz under these conditions was, quote, a fiction. It was, quote, a myth created by Poland's communist leaders. Well, that's really interesting. As a matter of fact, if you scroll down here in my book, this will be available digital copies with everything edited fully in a couple of weeks, hopefully. But if you look here on the screen, or if you're again just listening via audio, you could look this up separate. Here is an old article about Auschwitz death tolls being changed, reduced to about 1 million, 4 million to about 1 million. Now that's really, really, really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency published an article many years ago about a professor named Yehuda Bauer of Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And this professor says that the Wannsee conference, where the final solution was discussed, was not really a conference. He said it was hardly a conference, quote unquote. Bauer addressed the opening session of an international conference held here to mark the 50th anniversary of the decision to carry out the final solution, but it was not made at Wannsee, the Czech-born scholar said. The public still repeats, he says, time after time, the silly story that at Wannsee, the extermination of the Jews was arrived at. Wannsee was but a stage in the unfolding of the process of mass murder. Now, obviously, this story still encourages the mass murder belief. And of course, lots of people were murdered by both sides. The Allies, or the Americans in particular, killed 100,000 Japanese in Tokyo a few weeks before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were two basically atomic weapons tests. They weren't necessary to end the war against the Japanese. They were experiments on human beings, as far as I'm concerned anyway, based on the overwhelming available evidence. What happened at Dresden with U.S. forces and with the Royal Air Force was an actual definition of a Holocaust, as was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the actual definition of a Holocaust is mass destruction by fire. And that's really important because it means, if you look at the actual definition, which let me show it to you so you can see. This is the actual definition of a Holocaust, okay? The definition of a Holocaust is destruction or slaughter on a mass scale, especially caused by fire or nuclear war. Okay, this means that what happened in Tokyo was a Holocaust. What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were literally Holocausts. What happened in Dresden was a Holocaust, a horrible Holocaust, where hundreds of thousands of people died in an inferno. So that means that Jews don't own Holocaust, the word, any more than they own the quote final solution, because historically we have seen across the world, from Europe to Africa to the Americas to Asia, various forms of genocides and Holocausts that have been carried out, whether those were, I suppose you could argue, intentional or otherwise. We've seen them carried out time and time again. The mass slaughter of people, be it through incompetence and ignorance, or be it through intention, and then blamed on incompetence and ignorance, like Mao's mass murder campaign of 65 million Chinese, which people always try to downplay or completely ignore from historical records as if it didn't exist, when I think the Chinese probably should be remembered. 65 million, that's exceedingly more than any other country. But of course, it's communist, and so you have to downplay that because real communism hasn't been tried yet. Well, great. Neither has real capitalism, and neither has real Nazism, neither has real misogyny. Nothing that ever went wrong has ever, nothing real has ever been tried. Okay, let's put that. White supremacy has never been tried, the real white supremacy. It's just such a silly argument. And so although this professor says that the Wannsee Conference is not the location, he goes on to say that, well, there was a location. They did decide on mass murder. But the point is this. The point is the mythos around it. The Wannsee Conference. It's like another booby trap. You get past the first one, you get to the second one, you're like, wow, the Wannsee Conference. What was it? What did they discuss? And it turns out that's not actually where anything was decided upon, except, well, there was a final solution decided there or discussed there, but the final solution was a mass evacuation of Jews out of the Reich. And we're going to explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And as we go through this first hour, we'll get into hour number 2, and we'll get into more contemporary subjects. But we need to get this understanding down in concrete form before we can, as a foundation, before we can go any further into what's happening today. On your screen, you can also see the plaque at Auschwitz-Birkenau that has been changed from 4 million people suffered and died here at the hands of the Nazi murderers to 1.5 million men, women, and children, mainly Jews from various countries of Europe. The thing is, that's official. They changed the plaque. It's Jewish and Polish scholars that decided that. But if you say, well, I think it was more like 1.1 million people in the Jewish Holocaust, that's still considered Holocaust denialism. Despite the fact that the 4 million number, which reinforces the 6 million number, which ignores all the other millions of people, actually was just an idea. It was just, I guess a theory or an estimate, which means that at its core, the 4 million number was revisionist history. So when we go back and we get to the actual, this is still an estimate, by the way, when we get the actual, closer to the actual truth, far closer, because you got 4 million, you're down to 1.5 million. That's a substantial drop. the official numbers don't really change necessarily. The narratives don't change. The museums and the books, the library books, and all that doesn't change. But officially, this is true. It's very verifiable, and it's been known since, my goodness, the 90s, late 80s into the early 90s. Okay, so, but if you quote that, you'll still be called a revisionist historian, or you'll be called a Holocaust denier. And I'm here to set the record straight for everybody. Number one, the people that made up the 4 million number, they were the historical revisionists. That's number one. Number two, and perhaps most importantly, just like with historical revisionism, when people accuse us of something like that, or people accuse us of denying the Holocaust, who is it that actually denies the Holocaust? I'm pretty sure Israel denies various Holocausts. In fact, Israel won't acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Did you know that? Did you know that Israel won't acknowledge the Armenian genocide? Why? Why wouldn't they acknowledge that? There's a lot of reasons why. Of course, you could look at the complex history of it, but Israel won't acknowledge it for whatever reason, which makes the state of Israel ultimately genocide deniers, Holocaust deniers. There's a whole long list of Holocausts and genocides. The Japanese rape of Nanking, what they did to the Chinese, hundreds of thousands murdered. What happened to Japan in Tokyo, the firebombing, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, literal Holocausts, killing upwards of 100,000, more than 250,000, about 350,000 people. Holocaust in Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, Sudan. The Bolshevik Revolution killed tens of millions. China's revolution killed numbers that are beyond comprehension. 45 million from starvation alone, 65 million through mass murder campaigns. Don't forget about the killing fields of Cambodia. 25% of the local population murdered, like the 25%? Or maybe it was more than 25%. Off the top of my head, I do believe it was around 25% of the Ukrainian population that died in the Holodomor, which was a Ukrainian famine under Stalin. So Israel denies at least one of those Holocausts. They're the Holocaust deniers. If someone's a Holocaust denier, Israel is the Holocaust denier. If someone is a historical revisionist, well, by both definitions, it's the Soviets, the communists, it's Israel, it's Jewish scholars, because it's Jewish scholars who brought this to the public's attention, that not that many people died at Auschwitz, as had been said. And so if not that many people died at Auschwitz, as had been said, that should change the whole overall narrative. Does it? Not really, because it's still considered anti-Semitic. It's still considered Holocaust denial. It's still considered all these horrible things, simply because you read what Jewish professors or scholars said. There's a mystic quality to all of this. I can quote a professor in Israel who says the Wannsee Conference was not the final solution. Doesn't matter. I'll still get told, you're a revisionist, he's a revisionist, because there's a narrative that has to be held onto. There's too much money, there's too much political influence, there's too much power involved in this stuff. Take this other example as a case in point of what I'm getting at here. One of many cases and many points that I'm getting at here. On the screen, you can see I'm scrolling through the book, and I've come to a section with the Washington Post article that you can look up yourself. It's hard on most search engines, but I do believe Google will bring it up for you if you type in "Giving Hitler Hell," Washington Post, July 23rd, 2005. If you pull up that article, the article is a really, really critical and important piece. And I've screenshot it and the actual text in the article for the book in case it ever gets taken down. And it's really critical for this reason, because it talks about a very important individual, Benjamin Ferencz, the lead or a lead prosecutor U.S. prosecutor at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunals in 1945 and 1947. And when you read the story, it's really, really interesting because here's what it says. Let me read this to you. This is directly from the article. It says this. It says, in order for him, this individual, the guy that ran the Nuremberg trials, one of the lead prosecutors. In fact, I'll scroll down here to the text from the actual article, not what I typed out from the article, but you can see the actual article itself here. It says that he went on to a distinguished legal career, became the founder of the International Criminal Court. This is 2005, was probably the authority on military jurisprudence of the era. And he says it's important to recall that military legal norms at the time permitted a host of flexibilities that wouldn't fly today. Those include torture, lots of torture. Said this, you know how I got witness statements? I'd go into a village where, say, an American pilot had parachuted and been beaten to death and line everyone up against the wall. Then I'd say, quote, anyone who lies will be shot on the spot. He says it never occurred to me that statements taken under duress would be invalid. This is the guy that founded the International Criminal Court. This was one of the lead U.S. prosecutors. He didn't know that confessions or any kind of testimony given under duress would be invalid. But what does that say about Nuremberg? That one of the lead U.S. prosecutors acquired his evidence and testimony from people that he threatened to murder. That's what it means. That automatically calls into question the entire Nuremberg trials, every component, every element of it, not to mention the fact that it wasn't just like, hey, we'll kill you if you don't tell us the truth. But what is the truth? The truth is based upon a pre-concluded, pre-packaged narrative. So you could tell the truth, hey, Heinrich Himmler told the World Jewish Congress, we burned a lot of bodies. We had mass burnings of bodies. Why? Because of typhus and disease. But that was the thing they decided to hang people like Himmler on and many others on. If you go to the Oxford University Press, Holocaust and Genocide Studies 2003, it says one should look at the interrogation records, which indicate that the defendants were under constant physical and psychological pressure. Sleep deprivation was but one tool used by the interrogators to extract information. Pretty sure we didn't learn a lesson because we were doing the same stuff under the Bush administration, which was largely, I think, under the direction of Israeli forces. So they still love their torture today, I guess, apparently. And that torture extracted no usable, no credible information. And yet, I'm sure it probably still goes on today because it's not about getting the truth. It's about getting a truth. It's about getting, that liberal progressive ideology, that term, your truth, living your truth. These people are just living their truth. No, they're lining people up against the wall, putting the gun to their head and saying, tell me how many Jews you killed. And you say, I didn't kill any Jews. You're a liar. Bang. Because the determination has already been made. The conclusion has already been formulated. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Jesus could come down from the clouds and stand next to that German you've accused and say, no, seriously, he wasn't even in the SS. He wasn't in the military at all. He was just a German farmer. He didn't do anything. But see, if people like this prosecutor, Benjamin Ferencz, had said, no, you're guilty. Tell me how guilty you are. And Jesus said, no, he's not. Benjamin would have killed Jesus and he would have killed the German farmer, because it's not about whether you're guilty or not. It's about how much you're willing to play the game. That's what Nuremberg was all about. And the evidence is incredibly overwhelming for that. That brings us back, once again, to the final solution. Okay, what is the final solution? Final solution is a mass evacuation plan. It's not a debatable thing. There are records of it. And yet, despite the fact that there are records of this, that it was a mass evacuation plan, We still hear today that it was a code word for mass murder. Remember, the Holocaust Museum says final solution is the destruction of Europe's Jews, not the murder of Europe's Jews, which is a really important little piece of information. It's a really important piece of information because, contrary to the narrative and the mysticism and the mythology of it all, the quote Nazis never actually had a plan, even going back to 1933, to murder the Jews of Europe. Didn't exist. You can find evidence and proof of this on the Holocaust Encyclopedia website. You might say, well, they made the plan later. Fine, they made the plan later. Okay, but the point is, everybody acts like we had to have these strict policies and have to have war because the Germans were killing a whole bunch of Jews, and that's just can't have that. Turns out that's not what was happening, because here's the Holocaust Encyclopedia website saying, no, when the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, they did not immediately start to carry out the mass murder of Jews. Then they conflate anti-Semitism with mass murder. So I guess if you don't like Jewish bankers, or you don't like bankers in general who happen to be Jewish, then that must mean you're going to plan to murder them at some point. Once the Nazis controlled the German government, the Holocaust Encyclopedia says, you can see this on your screen, they used their power to persecute Jews in Germany. Now, persecution is a little bit different than murdering people. And hey, the Jews should know that, because they persecuted the hell out of Jesus and his followers. Here's another link, because the website actually changed. They had two different pages on this, and they changed one of them in the middle of me writing the book. So I had to go back and I had to find an AI assistant that pulled the original, changed it on the website. And it says, initially, the Nazis did not have a specific plan for the mass murder of Jews when they came to power in 1933. It's very similar to the other statement here, but it is slightly different. And the original statement, this is kind of like a paraphrase of what the article says, or what it did say. The original phrase was a little bit different. Okay, so that's really important, wouldn't you say? There was no mass murder plan. Maybe it developed later, but there wasn't a mass murder plan, which means we have to ask the question, what was all of this anti-German hatred? They persecuted Jews. How did they persecute them? Well, you don't know about pogroms like Kristallnacht. You don't know about pogroms and protests and boycotts. You don't know about that stuff? I thought you were smart, Ryan. Oh no, on the contrary, I'm mildly intelligent, and I'm very, very aware of the pogroms. The question is, why were there pogroms? Which is, the question for tonight's show. Pogroms Progress. Why were there pogroms to begin with? Okay, well, let's try to figure out why there were pogroms to begin with. Here's a chapter from my new book on the vandalizing of Jewish businesses and shops. This was Kristallnacht. This is probably the most well-known pogrom. You don't have to take my book as a source of proof. You can go to various other, quote, official websites, and you can find this for yourself. But Kristallnacht in German only lasted about 24 hours, maybe 24 and change. And that was in 1930. That was 5 years, 1938, 5 years after Hitler came to power. They waited 5 years to target Jewish businesses with, quote, violence. Maybe there was another reason they waited 5 years. Perhaps there was a trigger that made this happen, that provoked this in 1938. And that's exactly what happened. Ernst von Roth, a German diplomat who arrived at the German embassy in Paris on November 7, 1938, was confronted by Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew who fired 5 shots from a handgun at close range and murdered the German man. The response was that Jewish businesses and shops were broken into and set on fire, or had, I mean, windows were broken primarily. I'm not sure how many were set on fire, but definitely windows were broken. That's why they call it the Night of Broken Glass. But remember, it only lasted one night, and it was 5 years after Hitler came to power, despite the fact that there were all these big persecutions happening, which there were. But what were those persecutions, and why were they happening? And the question of what were those persecutions, why were they happening, can be summarized with the Crystal Night story, the true, real story, and that is provocation of such violence. Now, you can say nothing should provoke that kind of violence. Okay, that's really great that you can sit there with no context or with very extreme bias, out of time, out of place, with no historical knowledge whatsoever. I'm not even saying I'm the expert on this, but it's nice that you can sit there and say all of that without knowing anything and without living in the conditions that the Germans at the time were subject to, which by 1938 things had gotten better, but throughout the 20s and early 30s, Germany was hurting poorly, very badly after the Versailles Treaty, which stripped land from Germany, prevented them from having armed forces, and of course, basically stripped away all German autonomy. So you can understand why people might vote for a Germany first guy who said, let's build up the military, more so later, but let's get rid of the obscenity in our society, which is why they targeted pornography. That's why they targeted Magnus Hirschfeld's institute, which is the Institute of Sexual Science. That's the institute where you have a Jewish sexologist teaching kids about transgenderism and teaching adults about it and cutting off people's wieners. That actually happened. Magnus Hirschfeld was one of the primary reasons why books were burned in Germany. And I'll show you evidence of that. First, here's an article from the New York Times. Nazis smash, loot, and burn Jewish shops and temples until Goebbels calls halt. Really interesting story because it wasn't the Nazis that did it. It was actually the Germans that did it. And then Joseph Goebbels, who reportedly was the guy that provoked it, he didn't. A Jewish terrorist killed a German diplomat. Goebbels said, all right, stop. Why would the Nazis say stop doing this to Jewish businesses? That seems totally antithetical, totally contrary to everything we've heard about how evil and wicked these nasty Germans were. Why would Goebbels call an end to it? I don't know. Why don't you take a little bit of a guess? Maybe the whole story we've been sold is not the whole story. Maybe it's a very curated version of that narrative. And maybe it's not that accurate. Maybe there's more to the story. Actually, there is more to the story. Here's more to the story right here on your screen. This is from the Holocaust Encyclopedia. Magnus Hirschfeld, a German Jewish doctor and leading researcher of sex, sexuality, and gender. And you'll notice in the key facts the Holocaust Museum wants you to know. Fact number 3. In May 1933, Nazis looted Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science and destroyed much of the archives in the Berlin book burning. Which is why, and I've showed this to many of you before, and I have to be careful how much of this I show on screen, considering the swastika. Oh my God, an ancient, archaic symbol of enlightenment and knowledge and strength, regardless of which way you turn it. Oh my God, that symbol's so evil. What were the Nazis burning? For bonus points. Well, you can see on your screen, pornography. And what did that pornography, where did that pornography in those books and those transgender ID cards, LGBTQ, where did all that come from? It came from Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science. And the Holocaust Encyclopedia online even says that. So sure, the Nazis burned books. Why did they burn books? What kind of books did they burn? That would be like, think about it from a modern perspective. Okay, if you have a library and that library is full of the classic literature, classic books, classic stories. You've got 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You've got Atlas Shrugged, classic books, classic poets, Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know too many poets, but Edgar Allan Poe. And then you have a whole section, which is true and real today, of pornography and for some reason, interracial books about sex and books teaching kids how to have not just sex, but how to have anal sex. And this is for like middle school and maybe even younger in some cases. things that are so explicit that parents can't even read them at the school board meetings because it's too obscene. And so if you decided one day, you know what, as a parent, I'm sick of this, and maybe you even have some people at the school who agree with you. So you go into the library, you pull out all those books, and you burn them. Now you fast forward, it's been almost 100 years since that happened in 1933. Fast forward, and could be 20 years, let alone a century you fast forward. Does anybody have context for that? Or is it these radical conservative Christians burned this beautiful psychology and philosophy and sexuality because they're so repressed, and most of the authors were Jewish, and that means they were also anti-Semitic? And do you have any context for the reason people burned that stuff? Because they didn't want their kids being taught how to stick their private parts in somebody else for some weird reason. It's usually a kid with an adult or some kind of interracial thing. Frankly, I don't have an issue with that. I'm just saying, like, in terms of interracial relationships, I'm just saying, like, for some reason they teach little kids, like, here's how you put your hot dog into somebody's bum, and they also need to be black too. It's a weird interracial thing, which is, all part of the pornography industry, with virtually an entire Jewish cast, from the actors to the producers, from magazines to sex lines to the pornography industry itself. It's almost exclusively Jewish. In fact, I can actually show that to you too. It's pretty important in regard to Magnus Hirschfeld. But this is from my book. Not as many images here, but there's a history of Al Goldstein, and how Al Goldstein, by the way, some people say that Hugh Hefner was Jewish. I don't think that he was, but he was dating a girl for a long time who was Jewish. But Playboy is not that graphic. Hustler's more graphic, and Hustler's only around because of Al Goldstein. And Al Goldstein is one of the premier pornographers of the age. He is the guy that pioneered hardcore pornography, which, if you want to do that yourself, that's fine, but not when you change a culture with that kind of material. Then you have people like Ruben Sturman. Ruben Sturman is another huge name in pornography. Pulling his name up in my book, he was known as the Walt Disney of porn. That's a pretty big title, the Walt Disney of pornography. So those are two big names. There's also Stephen Hirsch. Stephen Hirsch is I would say he should be a famous pornographer. He founded Vivid Entertainment. There's a whole bunch of companies, Vixen Media, Blacked, Tushy, Dog Fart. There's a bunch of AVN, which is like the biggest entertainment porn news platform. The list goes on and on and on, but they were all founded by Jews, and the entire list. And then Pornhub now is the biggest overall, and it's owned by a rabbi, literally owned by a rabbi. So there's something else going on here. Most of the famous pornographers themselves, the stars: Ron Jeremy, James Dean, Nina Hartley, Joan Angel, Michael Lucas, Naomi Russell, Seymour Butts, who was particularly sick because he did porn working with his mother, which is kind of close to what Rabbi Shmuley does with his daughter, selling butt plugs. These are really sick mother effers, let's put it that way. But this is the history of the obscenity of the Jewish community. It's like almost exclusively not entirely, but almost exclusively Jewish. And if you look at the history of obscenity in the United States, the first act of lesbianism on a stage, 1923, a Jewish play, and the theater owner was Jewish. We're talking about something that at the time, this was 1923. That might have flown in like Weimar, Germany in 1933 or 1923 rather, but it certainly didn't fly in 1933. But it might have flown in Weimar, Germany in 1923. It definitely wasn't flying on Broadway in the United States of America in 1923. And it was so obscene at the time that the Broadway producer, Harry Weinberg, who's Jewish, and Sholem Asch, who wrote the play God of Vengeance. He wasn't arrested. I think the producer Harry Weinberg, he was arrested. Other people were arrested for the obscenity. And the play itself was, get this, the play itself was about a Jewish brothel owner who attempts to portray his business as, quote, ethical while he simultaneously tries to marry off his daughter. The idea is he's trying to be ethical and save his daughter from a life of prostitution, but his daughter ends up falling in love with a female prostitute, and they bang, and they kiss, and it's implied that they bang. So that's all thanks to Jewish playwrights and Jewish theater producers and hosts. And then, of course, you have the first animated smut, 1972, Fritz the Cat, the first X-rated animated smut by Ralph Bakshi, also Jewish. He was born in Mandatory Palestine. You have the couple Horace Liveright and Albert Boney, who founded Boney and Loveright, which, I mean, those names like Boney and Loveright. They founded this company in 1917 as a publishing house. They launched a company called Modern Library, and the main company became famous for publishing materials that conflicted with 20th century obscenity laws and the accepted definition of morality at the time. And then, of course, Roth versus the U.S. in 1957. Samuel Roth was Jewish, and that is what changed with the Roth test. That is what changed the definition of obscenity in the United States, turning the United States sometime, between the 20s and 50s into Weimar Germany, which is why you now see Weimar conditions. You see the LGBTQ, you see the excessive, compulsive attention to LGBTQ. You see the transgender identification cards that Magnus Hirschfeld gave out. You see all the things that were happening in Weimar Germany, and you see all the things that Hitler wrote about in the second chapter of his book, Mein Kampf, which came out in the mid-1920s, what he saw in Vienna. He said that this was all Jewish, and it was all obscene. And one had only to observe the names of the people involved. I'm going to find that quote. Here it is. He said, "In my eyes, the charge against Judaism became a grave one the moment I discovered the Jewish activities in the press and art and literature and the theater. All unctuous protests were now more or less futile. One needed only to look at the posters announcing the hideous productions of the cinema and theater." Let me make this a little bigger. Cinema and theater, and study the names of the authors who were highly lauded there in order to become permanently adamant on Jewish questions. Here was a pestilence, a moral pestilence, with which the public was being infected. And he goes on to describe how sometimes it went so far as that one of these fellows acting like a sewage pump would shoot his filth directly into the face of other members of the human race. Now with social media, Facebook's Jewish, Google's Jewish. Now they can literally inject this material into your face. And when you get the aspirationally Jewish Elon Musk and the general idea that sex sells, that's why X is filled with pornography. That's why Facebook is filled with pornography, softcore to hardcore. But you can't seem to find confirmation of the things that I'm showing you tonight that are official history that have been revised. And then when you bring them up, people accuse you of being a revisionist. You see how it works? And so that kind of brings me to the question of tonight's show, the subject of tonight's show, and that is Pogroms Progress. What is the Pogroms Progress? Well, I have a theory. It's not a good theory, especially if you're Jewish. And I'm a messenger, so we're clear. But the question is, are we staring down the barrel or the gas chamber, to use a kind of a joke? Are we still staring down the barrel of a global pogrom? And I ask that question for a number of different reasons. Okay, because historically, Jews have faced pogroms virtually everywhere they've lived. And that might speak to your emotional center, and you might say, well, that's so awful. Why? Okay, well, let's figure out why there have been all these pogroms, and then we'll talk about why there might be a global pogrom coming. I was talking about Kristallnacht, but what about the boycotts that occurred in Germany 5 years prior to Kristallnacht? There were boycotts. Did you know that? There were lots of boycotts. As a matter of fact, there were boycotts all across the United States And this was before those protests in Germany. Most people know the April 1st protest. Oh my goodness, the April 1st protest, all the Jews were protested against. It was a pogrom. It was just a horrible thing. Here's a picture of Joseph Goebbels, and Joseph Goebbels is talking. He's the propaganda minister, April 1st, 1933. This is from the National Archives and Records Administration, College Park, Maryland. Look at that evil Nazi talking to those Germans who lined up to hear him. Notice the date, April 1st, 1933. See, the problem here is, though, they don't explain to you or provide you the context of what you're now looking at on your screen. This is an article from March 24th. Now, I don't know if you count that well. I don't know if historians count that well. I'm not a mathematician, but I count well enough to know, and I know the months well enough to know that March came before April, which means about a week before the boycott and where Goebbels is out there speaking, there was an international call by, quote, Judea that declared war on Germany to boycott German goods. Why? Because the Germans said, we don't want the Jews in our society anymore, at least most of them. Some German Jews were allowed to stay, some married to Germans or participating in the economy. They were allowed to stay. Things intensified later, but they were allowed to stay. We already learned that in 1933, there was no plan to murder Jews. The persecution is what they considered to be part of the Holocaust. So they changed the definition of that. That's part of the final solution. We'll go back to that in a second, too, with the pogroms. Okay, so Judea declares war on Germany. Here are some papers, the New York Daily News. Notice the article date, March 28th, 1933. 40,000 roar protest here against Hitler. There's Madison Square Garden. Boycott Nazi Germany. Boycott Nazi Germany. It's a lot of people that are brought together really fast. Here's another one. For humanity's sake, boycott German industry. Don't buy German goods. Here's a shop. I do believe this is in New York. For humanity's sake, don't buy Nazi-made goods. It's the same talking point. Here's a very famous image. Judea declares war on Germany. Boycott all German goods. Here's another one, putting up signs. Boycott German goods. And then the Nazis have a rally. And, oh my God, did you hear that the people with swastikas on their arms, they had a rally? Yeah, but you also rallied the entire United States around what was a myth, propaganda. The Jews are being murdered and killed. Hitler literally just came to power a few weeks before. What are you talking about? This protest was to save the Jews of Europe. To save them from what? Because nobody was being murdered. Nobody was even being persecuted outside of I mean, Hitler just took power. Governments are usually very ineffectual for several weeks or several months. You know, the April protest, even if it was planned before, it took what? February, March, 2 months, months and change to actually take place. It was only in response to a anti-German protest. Why aren't we told this in school? This changes the whole story. And you can see this on the Holocaust Encyclopedia website. They say after Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany on January 30th, 1933, the Nazi leadership decided to stage an economic boycott against the Jews of Germany. Really crafty, tricky stuff here because, yes, they did have a boycott. They did in April after the anti-German pro-Jewish boycott, which was organized by Jews in the Zionist Council in New York and other groups, some of which didn't want to have a boycott, by the way, because they knew that what it would turn into, which would turn into, quote, a pogrom against the Jews, which it did in many ways. But the Zionists were okay with that because it would drive more Jews to Israel, which again is also part of the second part of tonight's show. We'll kind of get to that as the show goes on. Okay, so they decided to stage an economic boycott. What kind of boycott was that? That wasn't the boycott that Goebbels was speaking at, because that came months later. The economic boycott was, we don't want Jewish products or businesses. If you're in the country illegally, if you haven't assimilated, if you don't fully speak German, if you're participating in the degradation of German society and culture, get out now. Go. We're not going to force you, but leave. It became more aggressive later because they refused to leave. And then later it became even more aggressive because and then it was mass evacuation. That's what it eventually became, mass evacuation, which was the final solution. And that mass evacuation involved moving those Jews out of the Reich, just get them out of here, and moving them to places like Palestine. As a matter of fact, in 1933, Zionists made an agreement with the Nazis called the Havara Agreement. And here's an actual copy of it. You can see on your screen. It was actually a corporation. It was like a business transferring products, resources to Palestine, which at the time, had been 16 years since the Balfour Declaration in 1917. It was still under both Arab and, of course, British control. And there were a lot of people living there that ended up getting displaced in 1948. And I say that not from the perspective of a liberal, because liberal ideology is Jewish ideology, which means that, and I mean that because the Jews are the biggest supporters of gay marriage, the biggest supporters of pornography, the biggest supporters of abortion. I mean, I could show you evidence of all of this. I feel inclined to, because I'm making this claim, biggest supporters of abortion. I'll try to pull that article up. If I type in biggest supporters of abortion, if I'll type in another word here, I'm trying to find this in my book where it is, abortion. I'll give you an idea. Yeah, okay, here it is, somewhere in here. Jews are the biggest supporters of gay marriage. They're the biggest supporters of the Mexican drug trade. There's a whole bunch of stuff I could show you. This is a whole chapter in and of itself. El Chapo's wife, by the way, wears a Star of David necklace. Mexican drug cartels are given technology by Israeli companies. Israelis train drug cartels how to kill better. Most of the guns that the cartels get come from Israel, which comes from the United States. The Jews are behind Black Lives Matter. They set up the NAACP. They're behind, and Black Lives Matter is also Marxist, which is another component, another element to this. But the Jews are the biggest supporters of gay marriage. And here, let me do this. I will pull this off the screen, and I will very quickly, we have a lot to talk about still in the remaining time, but I'll very quickly pull up the internet, and I will take you to this and show you Jews are biggest supporters of gay marriage. And you should be able to find the article. Yep, Times of Israel, U.S. Jews among the most supportive of gay marriage. All right, Jews most supportive of abortion. See if we can find, I know there was a news article from, I think, the Times of Israel. I'll see if I can find that right now. Although abortion is pretty big. I think it's maybe in this article too. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Take my word for it. It's in one of these articles. Yeah, it's in one of these articles about the Jewish support for abortion. Okay, just as an example of why liberalism is very Jewish, which is probably going to come in handy here as we get closer to the end of the show, because of where we're going to quickly and rapidly go with this discussion tonight. Okay, so we have a lot of stuff, a lot of information here, and I'm going to try to tie it all together nice and neatly. With everything we've learned so far, let's take a look at a couple of things in the news today, shall we? First thing you see here is the recent shooting in New York. Now, I'm not going to sit here and break it down because, honestly, at this point, it's irrelevant to the conversation tonight. And also, I don't think it was staged, but I do think it was staged in terms of the narrative, which is how a lot of this stuff works. I mean, in fact, I'll take that off the screen for a second. The Protocols of Zion, they are a hoax, but they're a real hoax. they were written by Soviet secret police. And the Soviet secret police that wrote them just wrote down the Marxist, communist, Bolshevik agenda and then made the origin of the document fraudulent. It's a satire, it's fake, but the Marxist ideology is in the Protocols of Zion. So they're fake, they're not real. Well, the document's fake and not real. I mean, it's real. The document's real, but it's not a real policy document of some group. But it is real in terms of an ideology. It's basically Marxism written down. It's basically extremist Talmudic Jewish Zionism written down. But it's fake and not real. Okay, it's a very similar thing to what I think about the shooting in New York recently. It's real, sure, people died, but it's also fake in terms of the narrative that has been built around it. So let's look at this story. A Blackstone executive, a cop, and a new dad-to-be. Blackstone confirmed this week that one of its executives, Wesley LePatner, was among the 4 people killed in the shooting. The suspect, identified as a 27-year-old Las Vegas man with a documented mental health history, took his own life on the building's 33rd floor. Some of you might want me to go into more details about that, and I totally understand. Let's break it down like this. Steven Schwartzman is the CEO of Blackstone. Like BlackRock, which is run by Larry Fink, and like Black Cube, which is run by 2 Jews that undermine peace deals, to put it lightly. You could look that up. Black Cube undermines Iranian peace deal, probably with Gaza as well. That's the Blackstone, that's the Black Goo, that's the cube of Saturn, that's the Palantir stone, and all that as well. But Blackstone executive involved in this, 27-year-old Las Vegas man, is the guy that did it. Now, I want you to notice something here. Okay, regardless of whatever is happening here, whatever the argument is, something weird has led to these narratives. Okay, it's already weird enough that it's the 33rd floor and it's Blackstone, and that you have a Blackstone victim, and she's also Jewish. Reportedly, Wesley LePatner is Jewish, who's a Blackstone real estate executive, and reportedly, I believe this other woman is also Jewish. I think 2 of the women that were shot were Jewish, from what I remember reading. That's really important. I think it's Julia Hyman. Maybe she's not, but I know Wesley for Blackstone is Jewish, reportedly. So, okay, you have a Jewish woman killed in a building that's run by a very wealthy, very powerful Jew, and on the 33rd floor, nonetheless, which I'm pretty sure that's the year, significant year in Jesus's life. It's a very occult number, and it's very important. Okay, so what is happening here? Try to figure that out. Okay, I went to X because there's a lot of videos on X. I try to download these videos whenever I can, just so that they don't go missing. And I found a couple of really interesting things. I found 2 clips from this one social media influencer named Sneeko, who I think is a pretty big name. I've never listened to anything he said outside of these 2 videos here. I don't know anything about him. But I want you to notice something here. He's on the scene. This guy named Sneeko, he's on the scene. Very, very famous, super famous, big following, massive following on social media. And he's listening to an interview. Take a listen to this. I plugged my computer in all the way here. If you can hear this. You know what I just realized? I think that I've been speaking without my microphone plugged into the YouTube feed the whole time. I really apologize for that. Oh, well, the audio is clean and clear in the actual main audio file. Remember, we're not live tonight because I'm out of town. This is a brand new show for Friday. I apologize for not having the mic plugged in for the YouTube feed. It is plugged in for the normal audio feed. Anyway, you can hear now what he has to say. Let's take a listen to this.
I don't know if it's political. I did see one that had a Palestine shirt on.
So this guy is telling the reporter, he's telling the reporter that one of the people had a Free Palestine shirt on. Free Palestine shirt. Free Palestine shirt.
You said a suspect had a Free Palestine shirt on?
I saw one of the guys getting arrested. He had a Free Palestine shirt on.
Was it this dude in this picture? This dude is another.
No, it wasn't that guy. It was another guy.
So there's two guys now?
I think it was two guys, yeah. That's what I heard. It was definitely politically motivated.
You don't think it's a false flag? It could be, someone staging an event to try to place blame?
No. I don't know that shit. Yeah. False flags, none of that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think it's just a bunch of guys just want to send a message or whatever. Or
Update at this time, the scene has been contained and the lone shooter.
Okay, so a guy is on the scene to let people know there was a Free Palestine shirt. And then here's another one.
I overheard you saying that there wasn't a guy with the Palestine shirt.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh.
No, we were saying that's his friend.
Oh, okay, fine. I was gonna say, yeah, I don't know who this guy is, but there was a guy arrested.
Oh, can you show them?
Yeah.
So was he the shooter?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's the picture that initially showed a different guy.
Yeah, I thought it was this guy.
Right. So I don't know if that. Right now we don't know. It seems like it was that guy who was the shooter. Maybe he's an accomplice. There's also another woman arrested.
Which guy do you think it was? The Palestine guy?
No, it seems like the guy with the gun.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why this guy was arrested. We'll have to see. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
We'll have to see. That's all I'm saying. So there's two people on the scene that just conveniently are there to catch up with the news and to find streamers and tell them what they saw. And both of them, not only do both of them look very Jewish, both of them are saying the same exact thing. And they've got the evidence on their phone. Look at this. Oh, he had a Free Palestine shirt on, or somebody had a Free Palestine shirt on. Which is the narrative, right? Oh, it was a radical Free Palestinian protester who went into the building and killed some Jew in a Jewish company. Creates some really good optics, doesn't it, for propaganda? Don't you find it suspicious that there's just somebody there on the scene? Kind of like with that shooter, or rather that call him a terrorist, in New Orleans. The person who investigated the terrorist in New Orleans, the truck driver, she was Jewish. She found his Quran in his house. Just like the guy that was burning people in Colorado, the person there to document it was a Jewish tourist who just happened to be there to film it. That's a lot of coincidence for people that make up such a small percentage of the population. I mean, in New York, you got a lot of people that are Jewish. It's one of the biggest Jewish populations outside Tel Aviv, if not the biggest outside Tel Aviv. It's just weird that there's just a bunch of Jews running around the scene and talking to reporters, be like, yeah, I saw Free Palestine. It was definitely a Free Palestine. I mean, that to me calls into question the whole thing. Like, I think maybe it wasn't a Free Palestine guy. Maybe you have Jewish, Israeli, IDF, Mossad agents there, like with 9/11, to dance around and to tell people that it was definitely the Palestinians, which is literally what they claimed. I can actually show you this. This is literally what they claimed on 9/11. ABC News, dancing Israelis, if you type that in. You can pull up the article. It's still up from 2002. And you can see in the article where when the police get into the van and they're asking these people, it turned out to be Mossad agents. Most of them did. They asked them what they were doing and so on. The police, they acted like they owned the police. And these are Israelis. This on 9/11. And they told the police this: we are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem. The Palestinians are the problem. It kind of sounds similar to what I just heard from Sneako's, whatever it is, social media channel or whatever it is, where there just happens to be Jews running around the scene being like, yeah, it was Palestine. Palestine did it.
I overheard you saying that there wasn't a guy with the Palestine shirt.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh.
No, we were saying that's his friend.
Oh, okay, fine. I was gonna say, yeah, I don't know who this guy is, but there was a guy arrested.
Oh, can you show them?
Yeah.
I don't know who it is. Maybe it was. Here's a picture of it. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying, like, this is really blatant and disgusting propaganda. These are agents clearly that work for the Mossad or work for the CIA or work for both, or they're IDF, and they're stationed there during the event to make sure that everybody knows, because they're eyewitnesses, that this is what happened, which is really similar to how Yad Vashem documents Holocaust survivor stories. You don't have to prove anything.
You don't even have to be Jewish. You don't have to have any. You could have been living in Alaska. You could have been living in, which Alaska wasn't even a state at the time. You could have been living anywhere in the world at the time, and you could still be a Holocaust survivor. Did you know that? All you got to do is put your name on a piece of paper and say, oh, I saw some stuff, heard some stuff. I'm a survivor. Can I collect some money now? Which is what most of it is a cash grab. It's that reparations thing that they've pushed on black people that the Jews have dominated in both the entertainment industry for music and in sports for generation after generation after generation after generation. So, and if you want to see evidence of that, get my new book or look it up yourself. The Jews had complete control of the record industries, the biggest record producers, sheet music, basically turned black music into white rock and roll, and Jews also pretty much run and own the NBA and the National Football League, along with parts of the Major League Baseball organization, which is why when Dwight Howard, very famous NBA superstar, when Dwight Howard had said he put up this Free Palestine post on X, it was X or social media, that Adam Silver, the alien who runs the NBA, who's very, very Jewish, contacted him immediately and said, you got to take that down. Can't have that. I'm going to show that to you too. I should show that to you. That's actually really important. Let me see if I can find it. Free Palestine, Dwight Howard. I downloaded it, but I'm just pulling this up for time's sake. Play a little clip of this for you.
When you're in the NBA,
or maybe here I'll play this one's a little faster.
I tweeted Free Palestine, and I dang near got kicked out the league for it. And I'm like trying to figure out why.
4 years old.
So I tweet Free Palestine. Less than 10 minutes after I tweet that, I get a call from the commissioner of the NBA.
Stop it.
Agents, people working with my foundation at the time, Texas, you got to erase this tweet. You got to take this down. You're going to get it. I'm like, what did I do that was so bad?
It's my
Yeah, what did I do that was so bad? Well, Mr. Dwight Howard, who I always liked Dwight Howard. He's a funny guy. Used to love to watch him play basketball. And Dwight Howard basically saying there that, the NBA, which is like predominantly black, is completely controlled by Jews, and they control the narratives, they control the politics, they control the careers. And if you don't do what they say, you'll be out of the league. And you don't have any autonomy at all. It's kind of like Donald Sterling. So you got Adam Silver, who's the current commissioner, who did that to Dwight Howard. Then you have Donald Sterling, like Sterling Silver, who was the owner of the Clippers, which is named after a ship. But it's kind of ironic that a Jew owns the Clippers because of the Jews clipping coins in Europe. But he owned the Clippers. He ended up selling the Clippers, and he was in a conversation with his girlfriend. This is all leaked, where he said some really bad stuff about black folks because he said his girlfriend had taken a picture with Magic Johnson, which is like, it's Magic Johnson. It's one of the greatest basketball players ever. Even if you're like a quote racist, you got to, it's Magic Johnson. You got to get a picture with him. So she got a picture with Magic Johnson, and Donald Sterling Silver got really upset and said, quote, it bothers me a lot that you want to broadcast that you're associated with black people. Do you have to? Look, you can sleep with them. You can bring them in. You can do whatever you want. The little I ask you is not to promote it on that social media and not to bring them to my games. This is a league that is primarily, quote, black. And one of the owners of the team's a Jewish billionaire who owns the Clippers, said, don't bring those black guys to my games. It's Magic Johnson, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Don't take pictures with that black guy. And when you read the statements that he gave, or what he was saying to his girlfriend that came out as statements, he said some stuff that it's like he feels like he owns black people. Here's what he said. He said, I support them and I give them food and clothes and cars and houses. Who gives it to them? Does somebody else give it to them? Do I know that I have who makes the games? Do I make the games or do they make the games? Is there 30 owners that created the league? And he goes rambling on. He says, I give them food. I give them a house. I'm the one that gives them the things that they have. Sounds like he is a slave owner. And as a matter of fact, I will show you evidence right now that virtually the entire slave trade, at least in the South, in the United States, was Jewish. And that's not my opinion. You might have seen blurry images of this going around the internet. I dug up and found the original encyclopedia because I have to get the real source of information. I can't go secondhand. I got to have the real thing. So this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. And it talks about the control of the slave trade. It says, on the virgin soil of America, the Jews were among the pioneers of agriculture. During the 17th century, the sugar industry was monopolized by the Jews, and with their expulsion from Brazil, which was for the same reason they were expelled from Spain, Portugal, Lithuania, Germany more than one time, Russia on more than one occasion under multiple different czars, as well as France, England, and the list goes on, all because of economic issues and the alien nature of the Jewish community. By choice, that is. Others assimilate. They tend not to assimilate, although that's not always true either. It doesn't even matter if I say that because people see the name of tonight's show, Pogroms Progress, and they just assume all kinds of horrible things about you because they're idiots. But it goes on to say, from Brazil, it was transplanted to the West Indies. And it goes on to talk about the Jewish control of this stuff. And it says that the Jews were primarily in control of the cotton plantations. It says here, in fact, the cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly, not partly, wholly in the hands of the Jews. As a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them. Now, this is the Jewish Encyclopedia. Sounds pretty similar. Sounds really similar to what Donald Sterling said as a Jewish owner in the National Basketball Association. It bothers me that you associate with these guys with black skin that I profit off of. I'm the one that give them food. I give them food. That is like literally the kind of stuff you'd see from like the caricature of a plantation owner. It's not my fault. I gave them food. I gave them clothes. I gave them cars and houses. It's not my fault. Although you can't really talk like a Southern gentleman like that. You got to talk like the guy on the video I just played. He's like, I don't know. I gave him cars. I gave him houses. I'm not really sure. Maybe I gave him a house. Maybe I didn't give him a house. I don't know. It depends what makes me a good guy. Maybe a good guy or not. I don't know. Anybody got some change for these shekels? Literally, the guy that owned the Clippers was like, don't bring blacks to the game. It's primarily a black game. And it's a fat billionaire Jew telling his girlfriend, who's I think of a different race on top of that, don't bring these other races to a game that's dominated by various races that are not white, even though white's not a race. It's just unbelievable, but that's the pattern here. That's what we can find over and over and over again here. I'm going to bring back the story, the current events, and to go through some more of this stuff with you. It's really, really important. Here's a video with Reid Hoffman, who's a open Zionist, who also might be Jewish, although that's confirmed and disputed. It does matter, actually. He's the co-founder of LinkedIn, and he is discussing on this video with Joe Lonsdale, one of the founders of Palantir, why what's happening in Gaza is not genocide. I'm going to let you listen to this, and then I'm going to show you that 2 Israeli groups just came out and called it genocide for the first time ever, and we're going to look at those reports and what they say.
I want to talk briefly about the growing anti-Semitism in the U.S. Just I'm curious your thoughts. I've spoken out against some of the people that Joe Rogan has chosen the platform without pushing back, and then some of the stuff Tucker seems like he's gone off the rails. There's the stuff on the right that I'm actively speaking out against, and I get a lot of attacks. Some of it may be from bots from Pakistan, but I think some of it really is from people on the right who don't like that. Matt Gaetz and everyone said, "Oh, you can't attack them." Obviously, there's probably a lot of stuff on the far left too at the universities.
Yep.
I tend to think that Ibram Kendi critical race theory stuff was bad because, and I'm curious what you think. I think if you define oppressed and oppressors as an important framework, and you say, okay, the reason, for example, that these African Americans aren't doing as well is like because they're oppressed. You can't say anything else about any cultural or other things to fix. If you say that, then you kind of also have to say, well, the reason Jews must be doing better, they must be oppressors, because so if you look at it, like 19 and 25-year-olds who've gone through the system, who have these frameworks, the majority of them have problems with Jews right now, which is terrifying to me.
Yeah, of course.
Like, what do we do to fix
If he's not Jewish, why is that terrifying? He must be Jewish.
this? How do you think about it?
So, well, one, I mean, I think part of the reason why the Jewish minorities always tend to be very successful is a high focus on education. I think that's a really good thing. Say, hey, how do we get ahead?
That's also not completely accurate. I'll prove that to you in a moment.
By studying, by being good. We want that everywhere, right? Not just in kind of Jewish culture. I do think that the notion I find, and look, I gone and argued against a lot of kind of lefties who are like saying, look, the only like, for example, they say, Israel is committing genocide against Palestine. You're like, no, it's not. Genocide is something different. You could say there's civilian casualties in some ways that the war is being promulgated. That's really suboptimal.
You can argue about this.
Yeah, you can argue about that, but it's not genocide.
Exactly.
No, it is genocide by definition, and we can prove that to you. I will prove it to you, not by my opinion, but by now 2 Israeli groups that have, for the first time ever, and these are big groups, said that no, it is genocide. Before we do that, though, let me show you very briefly this mythos about how Jews are the most intelligent people on the planet. Here is a series of X posts that I just started coming across. Ashkenazi Jews have the highest IQ in the world, 110. Nobody has 110 IQ as a culture in the world. No culture has that. And you can see these on the screen. They all say the same thing. Ashkenazi Jews have a higher average IQ. You know why? They don't mix race. That sounds like they're the white supremacists then. Ashkenazi Jews have the highest IQ in the world, at least 10 points above most others. And these are all pretty much the same. You can see there's a bunch of these different posts. Okay. The thing is, if you just go to the internet and look up IQ numbers, World Population Review, and others, you'll notice that, Israel is down here in the 99.1 as of 2024 average IQ range, 99.1. And their ICI grade score for like education is a B+, so it's not even an A. And that puts them behind Turkey, India, and a bunch of other countries. However, if you look at the top list for IQs, you'll find that nobody has 110 IQ as a culture in the world. And you'll notice that most Asian countries have the highest IQs. China averages 107, Taiwan 107, Hong Kong 107, Macau 107, which is like a small little area in the same region. South Korea 106, Japan 106, Iran 106. But I thought those Iranians lived in caves and dirt huts with their women in hefty bags. You're a fucking retarded human being. Fuck you. That's the most ridiculous propaganda that the Jewish media ever produced about Iranians, Afghanistan, Iraq, or any of those other countries. And besides, Iran is like ancient Persia. It's part of Western Asia. It's not the Middle East. It's so stupid. Anyway, that's my cursing for the night. It's just so stupid. The point is, if you're Asian, yeah, you probably are much more intelligent than the average Israeli, which, the mass majority are Jewish. So that means that China, and if you don't, there's no way China has that kind of an IQ. Okay, fair. Maybe China doesn't have that high of an IQ. But let's look at Japan, because Japan has 106 IQ on average. South Korea, 106 IQ on average. And they all have, along with Singapore, which is 105, roughly average, and there's different metrics by which this is determined. But Japan and South Korea have some of the highest IQs. And if you look at their grade for like their actual intelligence grading and education, it's the highest. It's higher than China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and so on. South Korea and Japan are by far two of the most highly educated and intelligent countries on planet Earth. It's not even debatable. And so is Singapore. If you look at the average IQ based on a different scale, you can see here in the second column, Israel has an even lower IQ of 92 on average. So don't sit there and tell me, oh my God, the Ashkenazi Jews, they're so brilliant, they're so intelligent. Well, if they're so goddamn brilliant and so fucking intelligent, then please explain to me why after generations, after hundreds, after thousands of years of being kicked out of countries like England, France, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, Germany on more than one occasion, Russia on more than one occasion, and for some reason, they kind of look like demons in Japan that wear black cubes and hold Torah scrolls and have big, strange noses and look like rabbis. They might have been kicked out of Japan at one point. There's a long list of countries. If you're that smart, why haven't you figured out the reasoning behind why you've been kicked out? And that is because you are a peddler of pornography, smut, indecency, obscenity, and horribly degrading cultural and moral and ethical content that erodes the foundation of civilization and society. You also don't assimilate to cultures. Long before Hitler, the Russians said, get out. Catherine the Great said, we don't want Jews living in Russian cities. You destroy the economy, you gobble up all the wealth, most of you can't speak Russian, and you've destroyed the fabric of our society. Get out. She set up the Pale of Settlement. Oh, it's a horrible pogrom. Why? That's the question. If you're so fucking smart, why do your people continue to get kicked out of countries? And why do your people continue to have the same reasoning in all of these countries given as the root core of why they were kicked out? It's not even that they were kicked out. What was the reasoning? And the reasons are not different. They're all the same. Ethno-supremacy, quote, white supremacy. Influence peddling, cronyism, nepotism, fraud, corruption, lying, stealing, cheating, gobbling up all the resources, the 1% or the less than 1%, with a population that comprises less than 2% of the average population of most places. That's a higher percentile. Looking at places like the US and other parts of the world, it's less than 1%. And yet Mexico has a Jewish president, Argentina has a Jewish president, Ukraine has a Jewish president. You know, Starmer in Europe, he's not Jewish himself, but his wife's Jewish. He belongs to a synagogue in London, and he also has family in Israel. So he's essentially Jewish too. And you might say, well, I don't understand. I don't get, how could that, I guess they must be really smart. Well, if they're really smart, why do they not figure this stuff out? And maybe they have figured it out, but they don't want you to know that. So they call it revisionism, or they call it anti-Semitism, or they come up with all kinds of other names. And by them, I mean, you know, Zionists, Jews, Christians, I mean, scholars, people that buy the communist narrative and talking points and so on and so forth. They clearly have concocted an alternate reality, put it that way. It's, I think, what it is. It's an alternate reality. So that brings me to the, I guess you could say, the central core of tonight's show, and that is what we've just seen two human rights groups do in Israel, and that is label what is happening in Gaza as genocide. Now, for those of you who don't know this, some of you do, some of you probably know a lot more about it than me, maybe. But back in 1948, the Nakba occurred, that which just means like, it's Arabic. It means like to destroy or to cause great suffering. The Nakba occurred in 1948, and that was the establishment of an ethnic cleansing process. It also followed in the footsteps of terror campaigns by Ergon and the Stern Gang, which were Jewish Zionist terror groups. If you want to find a really interesting document that'll get you kicked out of family dinner, look up the Ankar document, which is a real historical document. See if I can find. I have it in my book, so I can find it on the computer. Yeah, it's going to be hard to find. It's going to be hard to find something that's really historically accurate. Okay, so let me bring this off the screen again, and I'll bring my book back up because it's in the book. Let me bring the book back up, and I'll show you the Ankar document. Pause the show, take a picture of it, Google image search it, and you can find the actual document. Here's the Ankar document. The Ankar document is a proposal by Israeli, or they weren't Israeli at the time, but Zionist terrorists to work with the Nazis. They said, we will bomb and we will sabotage the Brits, and you will continue to funnel Jews into Palestine. The Germans said, you're nuts, you're crazy, piss off. That's that document. That's what it says. We go back to Nakba now. The Nakba was an ethnic cleansing process, and it's ongoing to this day. That process includes rounding people up, putting them into facilities. The Gaza Strip itself is a de facto concentration camp. People say, no, it's not. Well, what's the definition of a concentration camp? Anybody? The definition of a concentration camp is a facility that has a large concentration of people. In many ways, Manhattan is a concentration camp, but it wasn't set up for the purposes of confining a particular group of people. In the case of Israel and what their country did, that's exactly what Gaza was and remains. Today, it has gotten more interesting, however, because today Israel wants to officially, they want to build something called a moral concentration camp. If only Joseph Goebbels would have been a better propagandist. Israel wants to build a moral concentration camp, says the Haaretz. This is an editorial that was written for the Haaretz, an opinion piece which was in opposition to this, quote, humanitarian city or moral concentration camp. An opposition was written to that in the Haaretz by who I assume is a Jewish author. And they go on to describe how this moral concentration camp is not a concentration camp. It's a moral humanitarian place where all the people will be brought who aren't kosher, and then they'll be confined to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller spaces, and they also can't leave. Did you know that Gaza was filled with refugees from different parts of the region? For example, Al-Majdal Asqualan, I believe is the name. I don't speak Arabic, but I believe that's the name. And those places were ethnically cleansed and people were forced into Gaza. And places like Jabalia and Rafah have been de facto refugee camps, or concentration camps, de facto refugee camps. And now that they've been pretty much decimated and destroyed, now the systematic destruction continues. It proceeds with moral concentration camps. Moral concentration camps. Moral concentration camps. That is the definition of genocide. And we get proof and we get evidence of that from, this is the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories. And you can pause the show and you can read it. And it says, an examination of Israeli policy in the Gaza Strip and its horrific outcomes, together with statements by senior Israeli politicians and military commanders about the goals of the attack, leads to the unequivocal conclusion that Israel is taking coordinated, deliberate action to destroy Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This is an Israeli Jewish group that is saying this. And if you don't have any context, you're like, it started on October 7th. You don't have any context for it. Look, I'm not on a side here. But if you don't have any context for this, be quiet. Shut up. Context is important. You could understand. You don't have to be on anybody's side, but you can understand why one side, however it's portrayed, would feel threatened by the other side and vice versa. By what happened in 1948 and onward, and what happens constantly to the people of Israel, largely by their own government. And what do you get out of this? You get a systematic process of moving and confining and restricting, and then eventually exterminating, that this is the genocide. And they don't acknowledge this, just like the Armenian Holocaust. They don't, because the Jewish one's the only one that matters, right? And the pogrom against the Palestinian people, that only matters if they were Jewish, right? Which, by the way, they actually might be the actual Israelites genetically, which makes it all the more disgusting that Netanyahu posted this on X back in 2023. This is a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness, between humanity and the law of the jungle. Yeah, children of darkness, the children of light. But we have no hard feelings against those people. They're just the children of darkness. Here is another one. This is the second human rights group, Physicians for Human Rights in Israel, and their report details the exact same thing, that this is a deliberative, cumulative dismantling of Gaza's health system, which prevents people from being able to live and acquire health care. I mean, they shoot ambulances. They've destroyed most of the hospitals. They've attacked 33 of 36 of Gaza's hospitals and clinics, depriving them of fuel and water. And then you just get all this propaganda on social media. We care. And when you see an Israeli over there stealing food or preventing people from getting food, that's really a Hamas supporter, dressed up like the IDF. Really, that's interesting you'd say that, because I'm pretty sure, can't be 100% sure it wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure that's what the Lavon affair was. That was the IDF planting bombs on civilian targets in Egypt to blame the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm pretty sure that's also kind of part of what the King David Hotel bombing was all about, where they killed Arabs, they killed Brits, they killed Jews as well. Pretty sure that Israel does this kind of stuff a lot. Blame it on the Muslims. There's always a guy there in Colorado. There's always a guy there on 9/11. There's 5 guys dancing. There's always a guy there, or 2 guys there in New York to let the streamers know this was a Palestinian supporter killing Jews. It's like, no, they were probably a really mentally ill, sick person, and the situation was exploited to be connected to political issues today. And of course, these reports from these 2 Israeli groups, they just came out a few days ago. Let me pull the article back up and I can show it to you. This is CNN on July 28th. And so these reports come out. Everybody's like, oh my God, they're committing genocide. Bang, bang, bang. Some Jew gets killed in a Jewish business. And oh my God, it's another pogrom. See, this is what I want to show you. The percentage of people around the world that don't like Israel is growing, and it's growing fast. According to Pew Research, just from a few weeks ago, most people across 24 surveyed, these are major surveyed countries, have negative views of Israel and Netanyahu. Here's the statistical breakdown. It's all pretty unfavorable. It doesn't matter where you are, the Netherlands, Italy, the UK, India, Mexico, which how Mexico has a largely unfavorable view of Jews and Israel and Netanyahu, and yet in a Catholic country that's like 80-90% Catholic elected a Jewish president. You'll never be able to that to me. But Mexico doesn't like Israel. Brazil, Turkey's the biggest one, but that's obviously regional. Indonesia, Japan. People don't, I can tell you over here in Japan, like I asked my wife, what do you think about Israel? I don't know. What do you think about Jews? What's a Jew? It's like, doesn't know, doesn't care. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares about the Ark of the Covenant unless they're Christian. Nobody cares about the Torah. Nobody cares about the Bible, because not the whole world doesn't revolve around Jews. It doesn't revolve around Christians either. It doesn't revolve around Islam either. Some people have their own views. Some people practice Buddhism. Some people just don't give a fuck. And maybe Christians and Jews and Muslims should figure that out before the whole world gets burned down. Shut up. Not everybody cares. I don't care about your God. I don't care about your prophet. I don't care about your special chosen people. Fuck off. We're all chosen by God. It's all a metaphor. Everything from the apocalypse and Revelation to the 10 Commandments. None of this is exclusive. It's all universal. The 10 Commandments in particular are universal. They're not exclusive to the Jews. They're not exclusive to even that region of the world. Ultimately, a lot of it comes out of India, parts of Asia. So it's like, seriously, It's not me being mean. It's me being very serious and direct and blunt. Shut the fuck up. The world doesn't revolve around Jews. It doesn't revolve around Christians. It doesn't revolve around Muslims. It doesn't revolve around the Torah, the Talmud, these sacred texts. The Talmud's not that sacred. And then they lie to you about, oh, there's 2 Talmuds. Yeah, there are. And one of them is the main one. That's the one that's really followed. That's the Babylonian one. I think it's called Bavli. That's the one where Jesus is burning in feces and you can have sex with a 3-year-old kid. That stuff they project on Islam and say, no, it's the Muslims that have sex with kids. No, it's the Jewish rabbis that have sex with kids. It's the Jewish rabbis that pop out of sewer drains in New York City. It's the Jewish rabbis who kidnap kids as part of Lev Hahor. It's Israel that is the main hub of pedophilia and LGBTQ today. Don't get it twisted. Homosexuality, pornography, obscene material are not accepted in the Muslim world or the Arab world. They are, however, accepted in the Jewish world. And the Jewish world pushes that on the Christian world. And the Christians sit back and they're like, oh my God, all this Jewish pornography, it must be Muslim. Doesn't make any sense, does it? That's because people have been gaslit and brainwashed. And now that you see that the world is turning rapidly against Israel, there's a question that presents itself if you're an honest person. And the question is this: considering what we know, and considering how these things tend to explode pretty rapidly, and considering the fact that clearly Israel is, through media and through social media, encouraging the acts and the behaviors behind the anti-Israeli sentiment, because it creates sympathy, it creates victimhood, and it recharges that Holocaust card and that persecution card that they act like they own. Here's the thing. If the whole world is, pretty much the whole world is seeing this, are we in for a global pogrom? And that's why I called the show tonight Pogroms Progress. I think we are. I think that this pogrom is, I don't think it's new. I think this pogrom is going to be a repeat of history, but it's going to be on a global scale this time. And if you're Jewish, I ask you this question. If you're Israeli, more so than Jewish, if you're Israeli, where do you go when there's a global pogrom? You can't run to another country. Nobody wants you. Nobody cares about you. Nobody gives a shit. You can take your sacred scrolls and your penis sucking ritual, which they call blood libel. It's not. It's a literal thing on the New York City State Health Department website. In fact, I can show that to you. Direct oral suctioning ritual. And there it is, the safe bris. It's put it on the screen so we don't think I'm making it up. Nobody wants any of that. People are tired of it. People also have the internet now, and they know that when you get kicked out of one country, you go to another country and you do the same thing. People don't want it anymore. And maybe you could run to Germany because Germany's pretty much overrun and controlled. You can't ask questions or talk about history in Germany. You can have symbols there. The famous gate is covered in Israeli flags. It means they've conquered and dominated Germany. It's a pretty sad day as someone who has a lot of German heritage. Sad day for me. I like Germany. Don't ever want to go to Germany because I'd probably be arrested like I would be if I went to Israel. Probably be disappeared in Israel, arrested in Germany, because I dare to talk about Hindu swastikas. And oh my God, there's actually swastikas right outside my room here, right outside the studio here, right around the corner. There's little shrines all over the place and swastikas. Oh my God, the Nazis invaded Japan. I thought they were allies. It's fucking stupid. People are so fucking retarded. It's so goddamn ignorant. It's just shocking. But what should be shocking more so than that is that if the world is turning against Israel, where are you going to go? And that's not a question of people might say, well, what are you threatening people? No. I'm serious. I'm doing this because I don't hate people. I hate things people do. I don't like bankers. It's not my fault that the majority of bankers are Jewish. I don't like big investment equity companies and big real estate companies for the most part. It's not my fault most of them are Jewish. I don't like big pharmaceutical companies. It's not my fault that Pfizer and Moderna are 75% Jewish run at the top with the scientists and the leaders. I don't like when Jared Kushner, the Jew that married into the Trump family, gets to work behind the scenes and influence everything from COVID policy to economic policy, or Howard Lutnick, the billionaire Jew who shared a street with Jeffrey Epstein, and who Epstein was actually instrumental in giving him his house and transacting the house. And that house was Epstein's house was given to him by the Jewish lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who didn't take his underwear off, remember? And that guy was introduced to Epstein by Lord and Lady Rothschild. And You know, at some point you're like, oh, wait, this is almost an entirely Jewish conspiracy. Excuse me, it wasn't just kind of, it was apparently an entirely Jewish conspiracy. So the more and more people that realize this, and the more people that see what I see, I'm not advocating for an ideology here. I'm not a Nazi. That's stupid. I'm not a national socialist. Bernie Sanders is a national socialist. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm also kind of nowadays kind of a political pacifist because I just don't care. I'm just kind of done with it. And I'm choosing to live a different kind of lifestyle now, with the exception of what you hear on this radio show. And of course, my new book that's coming out. But here's the thing. I won't be the only person that notices this. And where you have organic hatred and anger, where it's not manufactured by Israel for, you know, they're playing a dangerous game with fire here, where it's not manufactured by Israel. What you're going to find is that there are going to be a lot more people that are not as kind as me. You're going to wish you had Ryan Gable when people like Nick Fuentes eventually get power. I don't mean him, but I mean people like him. You're going to wish you had Ryan Gable, people like me, when somebody like Stu Peters gets power. Not him, but people like him. You're going to wish you had someone like me. So if you're Jewish and you're offended by this, let's become friends, because you're going to want to be my friend when the Stu Peters and the Nick Fuenteses gain power. Now, the Jewish community created Stu Peters and they created Nick Fuentes. And, well, they're not the only ones. Of course, liberal social democracy created that too. But when those kinds of people get power, they're not going to be so friendly. They're not going to be so kind. So you better figure out right now, if you don't know, why people don't like Jews, where the Jewish stereotypes come from. Realize and recognize that they're accurate and true. Jews are in finance and commerce because Muslims and Christians have been forbidden in those fields traditionally. That's why Jesus turned over the tables. That's why usury is forbidden in the Quran and the Bible, but it's not for Jews to do the same thing to Christians and Muslims, but they can't do that to Jews. They're not supposed to. You know, figure out where this nepotism comes from, where this cronyism comes from. If you don't figure that out, you're going to be confused. Oh my God, anybody who says anything about me is anti-Semitic. No. Some people like myself don't hate Arabs, which is the definition of Semitism. People like myself don't hate you if you're Jewish, don't really, frankly, care. What I care is if you promote pornography to kids and you promote transgenderism to kids. And I care when you control the media and drive the world into war with lies about babies and incubators and lies about weapons of mass destruction and lies about nuclear programs, why Israel holds their own nuclear facilities off the grid and off the record. You better wake up and realize what's going on and what causes a pogrom before you experience one in a way that there's no way to escape from it. So maybe there is an actual true Jewish Holocaust, a mass murder campaign coming. I've seen a lot of people say Jews better get guns and get prepared. Well, they should, but you know, Jews are also behind the no gun thing too. Bloomberg's Jewish. He's a billionaire, one of the richest people in the country, in the world. And he's the main financier, one of the main financiers against having guns. Maybe the Jews get their own guns, but the rest of us don't get guns. So you better figure it out fast, because the next person that gets power is not, and the next movement is not going to be as kind and friendly as me. I'm a scholarly person. That's it. I'm a scholarly person. Not an advocate for a movement. I'm not in politics. I'm a scholarly person. I've shown you all the evidence you need to know tonight. Plus, my book has about 98% more than what I showed you. And if you're Jewish and you don't get this, you need to get it real fast. And if you're not Jewish and you defend Jews, you need to get this real fast. And if you're not Jewish and hate Jews, you need to come in the other direction and realize it's not really Jews, it's bad people. And the fact that a majority of the bad people tend to be Jews in high positions of power, that's a separate issue entirely. It's not that people hate you as a Jew. It's that people hate bankers, lawyers. People don't like the pornography pushing on children and the transgenderism. Pornography, pedophilia, transgender, LGBTQ. People don't like those things. The fact that most of the people that push it are Jewish is a secondary consideration. Once you recognize this, maybe you can come to terms and grips with reality and learn that although it might not be considered kind or justified, there was a reason why all of these countries kicked Jews out. And if you don't want to get kicked off planet Earth and have to go back to Mars or whatever planet you're from, you better recognize this and speak out against it and take a stand against it. Because people that are coming next, the next movement, might not be as kind as some scholarly guy like myself writing books on the other side of the world in a place that doesn't really care, frankly, about any of this stuff. You better figure it out soon, because a global pogrom is probably coming. And I'm one of your greatest defenders if you're Jewish. Now, it doesn't make me special. I'm a great defender of Jews because I'm a great defender of humanity and liberty. And unfortunately, the next movement, history shows us, justified or otherwise, isn't going to be so kind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Pogroms Progress. If you're listening and watching on video on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, I apologize for the microphone issue for the first hour. This is not live. I recorded this Wednesday. I'm out of town. Or, well, I probably back in town by the time this starts to air, but I couldn't do the show live. tstradio.info, rtgable@yahoo.com. Please check out the show description below and the links. Please subscribe. Please grab a book. Please support the show. If you haven't done so already, please support us. Keep us on air, independent, 5 nights a week. Pogroms Progress, tstradio.info, rtgable@yahoo.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. And next week, we'll have another live Friday show. Everything will be back to normal right here on our YouTube channel. Again, please grab a book. Please subscribe. Please continue to listen to the free archive. Thank you so much if you've already done those things. You keep us independent Monday through Friday. Have a great weekend.